Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We're going to take a look today at some rendering mastery by Jorge Zaffino as we take a look at Terror Incorporated #1. So just before we get into it, if you enjoy the channel, if you feel like you might want to help out a little bit, go subscribe on my Patreon. Links are in the description, gives you early access to everything I do, helps out the channel, helps to buy new comics. So Terror Inc. is a comic that I remember hearing about when it was out. I'm guessing it was probably through Wizard, though. I don't think this would have come out on the newsstand. It is approved by the Comics Code Authority, but it also has some pretty gruesome stuff in it. The basic concept for the comic started in an epic title called St. George, and from what I understand, the idea behind the comic was it didn't have anything to do with superheroes, it was more about eternal entities of various different kinds, and one of those was this character called Shrek, which in German means fear or scare, something along those lines. And the idea behind this character is that originally, it started as a demon in sometime in medieval times or around there, and some villagers had to go and try and entrap it, and the demon took on the appearance of I think it was like a green bear with these 6 spikes coming out of its face. And they were able to entrap it by, imprisoning it inside of one of the villagers who took on the green corpse-like appearance with the 6 spikes coming out of his face. And then after that, he got shunned by the village, and he kind of decided to go and get along however he could, naming himself after the reaction that he would get out of the people who would see him. So yeah, he would call himself Fear, or these days he would call himself Terror. So the Terror Inc. comic was an attempt to bring over that character from the epic line, with an idea of trying to parlay that into bringing over other 70s horror type characters like Werewolf by Night or Morbius the Living Vampire that had kind of languished in the meantime. And I doubt it would have been worthy of much note. I mean, originally the comic was drawn by Klaus Janson, which is pretty good. But I mean, you'd seen Klaus Janson around. I think he was currently probably working on Daredevil in some capacity or another, maybe just as an inker. And I mean, honestly, I say that like it did make any kind of noise. As far as I can tell, it absolutely did not. It was originally slated for 15 issues, and it only got to 13, which is pretty bad. So sales must have been in the toilet. But the first 7 issues, at least, I have some pretty impressive credits in terms of the art. So they managed to get Jorge Zaffino for this, who is an Argentinian artist, started in the U.S. at Comico working with Chuck Dixon. And I guess that established a relationship, so he would work with him again at Marvel and get introduced around there. And then somehow he hooked up with D.G. Chichester for this. And Jorge Zaffino is a guy I think I might have mentioned once or twice. I know I've mentioned his son, Gerardo Zaffino, who doesn't draw very often, but when he does, it's usually pretty amazing. He did the more recent Conan books that I covered maybe like a year and a half ago. And I love his style. It's very rough, and like it feels like a woodcut or something. All of his characters are super beefy, and he's got a great command of light and shadow and composition. And it seems like he got that directly from his dad, Jorge, who unfortunately passed away at a pretty young age. I think younger than I am now. So he didn't produce a huge amount of work, I think mostly because, he's a guy who would pencil ink himself and would throw a lot of rendering on everything. So he couldn't keep up that kind of monthly schedule. But the comics that he did complete, I mean, we have them now at least, and they're pretty spectacular to look at. So let's get into this. We can start with the cover. We've got our main character, Terror, here, just taking out a bunch of criminals, probably. And you can see right on the cover, he has a knack for shadowing that not a lot of guys do. You can also see that crazy rendering. This is such a weird idea for a book. Like, I mean, there's weirder ideas out there. But yeah, I can understand why they would have been hesitant to try and put this out there in July of 1992. It doesn't really fit with the kind of stuff that was popular at the time, So we're going to start things off with a big old splash page, which is great. That's a good start. And starting, we don't even see our main character. We just see his victim. So Terror he's got a few things going on. For one thing, his ability is that he can basically plug in like different parts from people he's killed or maybe just maimed. So like if he needs to, he can replace his arm with somebody else's arm. And if that person is particularly adept with their hands or something like that, he might get that kind of inherited ability. Or, even if they lift, they work out. Yeah, no, okay, I'm a little bit stronger for now. And he uses that ability quite a bit over the course of the comic. And the way that he uses this, like what he uses it for, is that he basically has turned himself into kind of like an investigative bounty hunter. And his current target is this guy Barbados, who's an arms dealer, and Terror has managed to grab him and has managed to slit his throat, as we can tell from the drip here. It's not the most apparent, unfortunately, and that I'm going to lay at the feet of D.G. Chichester, I think. He's very vague in his descriptions a lot of the time, from what I've been able to tell. At least in this comic, anyway. But you can see from, right from the opening splash, Jorge Zaffino likes him some shadowing and is extremely good at expressing it. So we've got our very closely uplit character here. So we're going to wipe out a whole bunch of holding lines. We're going to give him a very stark shadowing pattern, like right underneath him here. It's amazing looking stuff. I think there's, some dry brushing going on in here. Like I said, Jorge Zaffino's inking himself. And I mean, that's just a wild start. I wish it was a bit more apparent that he had slit his throat. I didn't even realize it the first time through, I don't think. Except that later on, he mentions it here. And so he has slit his throat, but for some reason, he's still alive. So, Terror has tried killing this guy several times already, and theoretically should have been successful with how much damage he's done, but for some reason, Barbados just won't die. He refuses to. And this is our first shot of our main character. That's a pretty creepy shot. That's a way better shot, in my opinion. I love the close-up. Again, crazy lighting, great looking rendering. He likes to do a lot. His style is a little scribbly. He's not particularly big on feathering, but he's great at spotting his blacks and just kind of bleeding them off. Get the nice reflection in the eye, too. Like, this stuff feels kind of posed, with just how good the shadows are. And maybe they are. I can't tell. It could very well be just he knows exactly what he's doing. And they're going to have just kind of a pleasant conversation from Terror's perspective anyway. Barbados is a little bit more frustrated, really. He never really gets, scared or pissed off at Terror. He's just like, dude, this again. Come on. Aren't you going to try harder? Aren't you going to be a little bit more creative? Slitting my throat? Really? What happened to the bomb in my Beamer? Strychnine on postage stamps. Electrifying urinals at my favorite restaurants. Those were exciting. This just feels like you're losing interest. And it should be noted that anybody who's watched Jeepers Creepers, this does seem an awful lot like the guy who made Jeepers Creepers saw this comic and figured not too many people probably knew about it and based his creature off of it. Because that's also a green monster that develops spikes and antennae coming out of his face who can plug in limbs or eyes or whatever he's missing. But anyway, the less said about the guy who made Jeepers Creepers, the better. So this pleasant conversation goes on for a little while, but it goes on a little bit too long, and that Barbatos's guards hear about the commotion and they show up behind Terror here. Bit of a shootout breaks out, but, Terror's been around for a few hundred years, I guess. So he's able to get around these guys fairly easily. You get the impression they're not necessarily the most skilled. They're just muscle with guns. Takes out one guy with a knife to the throat, and then jumps up onto the desk and starts swinging on the chandelier, I think, or the lights. Ton of black on these pages, eh? I'd love to see what these things look like in black and white. So he's swinging around on the lights here. Goes swinging towards the window. While he does, somebody gets a frickin' rocket launcher ready and launches it after him. Why not? Let's go overboard. All this stuff here, pretty functional. Not so much the crazy visuals, but every once in a while, he's going to rectify that. So this is our next splash. This is Terror flying out of the window with the explosion behind him and the city beneath him. And this is glorious. I've seen shots similar to this pulled off by guys who don't have this kind of level of skill, which is nothing on them. You work with what you got, and a lot of those guys got better, but I've never seen it done better than this. Get the glass flying out, which at the center of the explosion, it's all white and see-through. As you get further away, you get more of the blackness seeping into it, so you just see the edges. The explosion itself, it's not a defined shape, as it would often. You just, when you're drawing, you feel like you have to translate it into some sort of abstract shape. Instead, he does that dry brushing again, where he more works the shadow in around the light source, which is a bit more approximating what light does. And the city beneath it here, like, there isn't a ton going on, but it looks amazing. A lot of it is assisted by, like, this shadow right here gives it a verisimilitude that it just wouldn't have otherwise. The rest of it looks fine. Like, you know, it looks pretty good. It's like this shadow makes this feel real in a way that it just wouldn't otherwise. And, like, all the brush technique he's using on the side of the building, he's leaping out of here. This is so wild. It feels messy, but at the same time, it also feels like it's achieving exactly what he set out to achieve. And as a guy who almost never gets that, it's like, well, damn, man, how'd you do that? Cut from there to the shot of Terror falling down the building. Absolutely spectacular. Looks like it goes on for miles. Got the fog coming up from the streets here, as you know, you would often do, because otherwise you're trying to figure out depth to a degree that just, it wouldn't serve you in any way. Plus, I mean, if you were trying to draw it in detail under here, that would obscure the figure. You can't do that. You got to have a white background for him to fall against. If anything, I think the colorist messed this up a little bit. I don't think it should have been blue. Blue suggests fog. It should have been yellow, which suggests, like, streetlights. But whatever, I don't care, because this panel looks amazing. So, yeah, he continues to fall until he hits the street. Falls right through the roof of a car, shears off his arm, his legs turn into jelly, and up at the window that he jumped out of, Barbados sends his men down to clean up the mess, essentially. And he says, burn it to ash, all of it. Like the little bit of doubling around the car here, just for the impact while Terror slams into it. So, okay, he's fallen down into the car here. And the guards come out to investigate. Like, look how much blackness is in here, but it still looks like this could be like a photo with the exposure just turned way down. So yeah, all he can do is sit in the car and wait to be found, because he's only got the one limb now that's working. So one of the guards looks in the car and goes, Jesus Christ, it's still alive, and reaches in after it. Terror manages to somehow grab his arm and tear it off, and then, of course, plug it into the empty socket of his shoulder there. So at least now he's got two arms. He's still working on those legs. But he hoists himself up through the window again. Man, that's a great shot. That's so creepy. That should be in a movie somewhere. Just this, legless torso hauling itself up through the roof of a car. So yeah, he gets up on the roof here, launches himself off it. This guy's a little bit too shocked to react in time. So lands on it, and I suppose rips off his legs and plugs them in as well. Like, it's more than a little silly sometimes, but it's silly in a gruesome way, so I'm more predisposed to be lenient towards it, I think. And because the legs have belonged to a guy who was a bit more on the athletic side, he was a runner, he's able to just sprint right up to these two, and he's able to incapacitate them. And once they're unable to really defend themselves, he gathers himself a couple of eyeballs and ears so that he can plug them in later. When he's as an investigator, because he'll be able to get information from those. Like I said, pretty gruesome. A bit more than I would have expected the comics code to allow, really. And I don't think this made it to newsstands. Oh, one of the things about Terror is that he has this metal hand. Apparently the deal with that is that when he was like in the Middle Ages, he managed to get himself knighted. And, so a lord. And he managed to find himself a woman who fell in love with him regardless of how he looked. So, absolutely cherished her, but then she died not too long after marrying him. So the deal with the hand is that's actually his wife's hand, which he had encased in metal and fused to his wrist so that he could always feel her touch. Which is like, man, that is a weird detail. I'm not sure where you came up with that detail. It's a good one, but like, man. All right. So having dispatched the guards that were sent down immediately to them, he has to make his getaway. I mean, it seems like Terror doesn't want to stick around in a sustained fight for too long, not with too many people. One-on-one, he can probably take out most regular guys, but he doesn't want to get swarmed. So he finds a nearby motorcycle. Thankfully, the hand he stole, like the arm, turns out it has a bit of mechanical aptitude. So he's able to work a little bit faster than he normally would at jump-starting the motorcycle, and he tears off into the night. And this creepy-looking gargoyle guy is our hero. All right, so that is our opening scene. I think that's a pretty good one. Although, again, kind of vague in that we don't know a whole lot about what's going on with Barbados or Barbados. It's probably not Barbados. All right, so from there, we're going to cut to somewhere that they don't give us a location. But, okay, this is the home of Michael, what's his name? It's like Michael Mega Dragon or something. Dragon Mega. Draken Mega? I'm not even for sure. They say it again later on. Michael Draken Megas. Which sounds like the writer found the Latin translation for something. So the deal with Mike here is that he's a paranormal investigator. He set himself up. He's got a pretty high reputation among that particular circle, but he's not happy about what has happened because he does believe in the paranormal, and the whole reason he got into this particular business was to try and inform and, warn people about the dangers of the paranormal. But somehow it got turned into a pop thing where it turned into like paranormal investigators essentially, and it spawned all sorts of spin-offs with other con men. So now he's got his agent here who's trying to get him to sign off on a deal to write a book about an alien autopsy. Yeah, kidnapping an ET of your own. And he figures that will make them absolutely rich. Of course, Michael has not done anything of the sort and will not put his name on something like that. His agent keeps pushing. Michael gets pissed off and, kind of has an outburst about it because he's a tortured paranormal artist, right? So eventually the agent has to leave. He figures he's got to offer this kind of stuff because this is his livelihood too. He gets percentages on everything Michael does. So if Michael's not working, if he's not promoting himself, if the agent isn't promoting him, then the agent doesn't really get paid very much. And now he's got to figure out some other way to kind of get his name out there. Now we get the impression that this is something that Michael has been brooding on for some time. Okay, so back in the city. Well, actually, this is on this yacht here. But we've got the city in the background, and it looks pretty great. Again, those shadows just kind of make all the difference. Usually when you see one of these cityscapes, you don't see that kind of caretaking where you're figuring out where the shadows go. It's usually like, okay, what kind of checkerboard grid can I put on this? Or do I just do vertical lines or something? And honestly, he's not doing much more in a lot of cases. It's just that on the sides that the sun isn't touching, he also adds some shading lines as well. And that makes a massive difference. There's a good chance this is also referenced, of course. But I mean, it was translated correctly. So Terror is on a boat with, I'm not sure exactly who this person is, somebody that he seems to know fairly well. It might be like his secretary or like his handler, or it might be his client. I'm not for sure. But she's telling him, you should move to the city. You can get all sorts of more work there. And he's like, nah, you move to the city, you got to deal with friggin' spider people or daredevil people or fantastic people. I don't need none of that. So what he's going to do instead is he's going to do a little bit of intel. He's got his eyes and his ears, and he's going to start plugging and playing. Starts with the ears first, and, he can't pick what kind of input he gets from whatever parts. So it's just kind of like you're hoping that you picked up something useful. And he says in this case, what he gets, first time he plugs in the ear is a marital altercation, accusations, denials of adultery. I prefer not to dwell on it. And he got like a similar thing when he was plugging in the limbs earlier. Like he plugs in the arm and he gets the feeling of like playing catch with a kid. And it's like, shit, that kid belonged to this guy I ripped the arm off of. Well, don't think about that right now. We've got like thugs to kill. So, okay, first ear was useless. Now it's time to try out the eyes. So he like flicks out his old one, plugs in the new one, doesn't get anything particularly useful. Again, he's looking at a child. Who was, probably the child of the person who the eye used to belong to. And say, okay, well, that's not useful. Plug in the other ear. Wait a minute, I'm getting like a weird chanting. And then plugs in the other eye. Oh, man, this eye goes with this ear. The ear stuff isn't too bad. The eye stuff is pretty gross. Nobody wants to see an eye pinched between fingers. Or, I mean, some of us do. But it's still pretty gross. Look at all this great line work on the eye. All, just a little bit of rendering here. I'm not sure. There's some ink going on up here. I think this might be like with a sponge or something. I'm not sure what he did, but that looks really cool. And of course, doing the iris in a very interesting and kind of realistic way. But like, you see how scribbly he gets sometimes with these brush strokes. But it's because he knows he's just trying to approximate a shape of a shadow. When you get this kind of close, you don't need super detailed rendering. You can go for it if you want to, but it's not 100% necessary, particularly not with Jorge Zaffino's regular style. So with the eye and the ear, Terror gets basically like a recording of a ritual that Barbados did that summoned Beelzebul, so another version of Mephisto, some kind of not quite the devil type devil. So he made a deal with Beelzebul, which would keep him from any kind of harm on the mortal plane, essentially. Terror takes note of the symbol that was used, so he's going to draw that down. And you might have noticed that the hand that he was using to place the eyeball and the ears was actually a woman's hand. So he got that off of somebody, and he really just needed it for this moment where he needed a little bit of artistic ability. So he realizes that because of the deal that was struck between Barbados and Beelzebul, he can't actually kill him and fulfill his contract. So he's going to have to find a way to break the contract between those two first. So we're going to cut to London. That's really nice. Again, this kind of stuff I assume is referenced. Like it would have to be to make you just go, oh, okay, London, yeah. But that's a nice translation. And Terror with a new hand again. So he's just swapping these things out constantly. He's in the house of an informant that he knows called Recrab, or Barker backwards, and he's handling the lament configuration or something close to it. So he's going to try and find ways to bring Beelzebul to the surface so that he can, get him to sever the deal or do something to make that stop being in effect. But he learns that's not really very likely. And Beelzebul isn't a kind of demon that shows up on the mortal plane very often. So he's going to have to figure something else out there. And at that point, he actually thinks of Michael Dragonmegas, who Terror describes as a pop necromancer. But it turns out Michael Dragonmegas is also the son of Beelzebul. He's got a couple of sons. One is the son of Satan character that would get his own title around this time, or not too long after. He was also around in the 70s. And the other is Michael Dragonmegas, although Michael is more of an illegitimate son, but he is also Beelzebul's firstborn, so that's a little bit convoluted. Damien Hellstrom, that's the other guy's name. Right. So Hellstrom has severed himself from his father, Beelzebul. Michael, as an illegitimate son, hasn't had to do that because he didn't get the same kind of family lineage, not being a fully recognized offspring. So they're thinking, okay, is there some way that maybe we can manipulate that so that he does inherit his father's whatever abilities or something like that? And then you can somehow finagle that into breaking the contract with Barbados. And you get the creepy shot here of Terror going, well, I always did have a way with children. Which is nice stuff. The art here it's all very good. It's hard to find something in particular to pick out when he's not going hard on the shadows on something like this. But it does all have like a very fluid kind of body language to it. Like his figure work is very nice. He's, all of his fundamentals, his proportion, his shadowing, perspective, all that kind of stuff. It's all very good. Although he does, of course, turn the shadows up to 11 a lot of the time, where a lot of the stuff in the background is just black. But that works perfectly with the way his style is. All right, so now we're going to flip to Michael Dragonmegas, who's on a public access talk show where he's going to spread the word about some devil shit, but the real word. And they're like, cool, let's hear about that. Also on this talk show, we've got Anthony Mang, main man of the wacky and wicked Temple of the Risen King. And Anthony Mang brings on his horde of children in devil costumes because our church's youth group used their pitchforks to divine the true knight spirit from the poor imitation. And yeah, so with this bullshit, Michael's just going to get up and storm off the set. His agent tries approaching him and he just shoves him by his face. Good stuff. And at least now we know why Michael is so pissy about all this, the dark arts kind of stuff is, because of his heritage. So from there, we're going to cut to a temple in, I would assume, Tibet. Nice outdoor shots. Again, I don't know if this is referenced, but it certainly could be. It looks really cool, like with the heavier rendering up front, and then you just leave a light mid-ground, and then you go heavy again for the far background. So, Terror is in this temple to try and find some clues about Beelzebul and Michael Drakenmagus. Or maybe not even Michael. I think it's just Beelzebul. And he's decked out in his parka with his goggles, which is fun. So, yeah, in this temple, there's this secret society that houses some kind of crazy serpent that only the head of the order can handle. It says attaining that plateau of oneness can take years, I'm told, a lifetime, some monks whisper as they lick cracking lips. My schedule doesn't allow for such a steep learning curve, but I claim an interest in taking part in their rituals. So later on, Terror works his way down into the pit where the snake is. And yeah, he rips off the front of its face while it wraps around him and then, collects the ichor that drips out of it. And that's where we're going to end this issue. So this ichor is somehow going to be related to, I would think, like a ritual or something for summoning Beelzebul or connecting Michael with his roots, that kind of thing. But like wild looking stuff, very Conan-y. And Jorge did do a bit of Conan before this, as would, of course, Gerardo. Like, look at all this wild rendering shit going on in here. He's going very basic with the snake itself. Well, like, look at what he's doing with this. Like, the tattered robe here that's tied around Terror. Oh, I didn't catch that the first time. You know why? Because the colorist obscured it a little bit. But the head of the order has got the elongated fingernails, and now Terror does too. So now he has the ability to handle the snake. Okay. But again, it's not something that the writer mentions. He tends to leave a lot up to the artist to kind of get it across to the reader. And, maybe the writer knows what he's doing, but if he doesn't explain it to us, then you kind of got to guess and hope that you get it. Yeah, wild stuff. So, yeah, Terror Incorporated didn't last too long. 6 issues by Jorge Zaffino, though, with another one penciled by Mark Teixeira and inked by Zaffino. So there may be another 5 or 6 issues out there that look at roughly about as good as this, or close to. It's a little tough finding exactly what Zaffino worked on in the States. I get the feeling he did quite a bit in Argentina. Aside from that, the only thing I know of his is Winterworld, which I do have, and I will be going over at some point. But yeah, he couldn't keep up with this. Like, the work rate on this is insane for a guy doing both pencils and inks. Like, you couldn't possibly keep that up month after month. Getting 6 issues out is pretty good. I would have expected like 3. And then after that, the guy they brought on, unfortunately, wasn't anywhere near as good. It looks like a guy who was very new and just wasn't very good yet. So, I mean, maybe if they could have kept up something similar to this, you bring Zaffino back every once in a while for an issue, and in the meantime, you flesh it out with guys. I mean, you want to share on his own book too, which he also struggles to keep up with, but I don't know if you can bring in Dennis Cowan. Klaus himself, I mean, Klaus helped create the character. I'm sure he would have, been able to work on it a little bit. But yeah, no, unfortunately, when you plug in a guy who's he doesn't have the chops, like really to be the penciler on a book at all. He should have been doing support features from what I saw. Yeah, that's a little bit of a death knell. And, it wasn't long before Terror Inc. started having the dreaded parade of guest stars. Sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't. So you got Damien Hellstrom, which is natural at least. It works with the story. But after that, you also got the Punisher, which is like, what? And then you got, I think Spider-Man shows up and also a Wolverine crossover. And then you end with Silver Sable and Luke Cage, which I don't know how that works, but okay. I guess they're also kind of on the mercenary side of things. Maybe that even works a little better. Wolverine doesn't fit in there at all. But anyway, I mean, short-lived books are a dime a dozen. There's bunches of them. At least this one looked interesting. You can't say that for all of them. So yeah, like I said, we will hit some more Zaffino eventually, maybe in another month or 2. But for this one anyway, that's going to do it. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notifications so you know when the next one's coming out. Go over and subscribe on my Patreon. Gives you early access to everything I do, from the Blood Force stuff to the YouTube videos before they get uploaded to YouTube, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. And you can join the Blood Force Discord server. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.